Good evening, good evening, good. Oh, wait a minute. This is not evening, it's morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the morning, it's a morning radio program here. WeatherBrains episode number 788. It's the pre-show. This is for the 22nd of February, 2021. We're in the morning. Jen, you're an in the morning person.
I am. I prefer the mornings, actually. How are you?
Good.
All right.
Typically, I'm doing this with just me by myself in here, but I'm glad everybody else is here so we can all participate in all of the pre-show. All right, so the embed code is up. Everybody's invited prior to the show starting, so that's kind of nice. I don't have to do that, so
Yeah.
I think we're good. Bill is ordering a breakfast pizza or a breakfast burrito. He's on the phone. Hello, I need breakfast delivered to my studio. This segment brought to you by Peloton. Ooh, I see a cattail.
Yes,
Cattail.
right.
Show title.
Cece's here.
Hey, James said, Dennis said, if you make fun of me, you should take a flying leap. So,
Wow.
I'll be right back. We're having trouble connecting. Hold on.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
No, so, we have cats at the TV station. My wife's allergic to them, so we don't have them here at the house, but we have two. At any one given time, we typically have two. We've had one for like 10 years.
No.
We found two black kittens that were like basically thrown away in the dumpster. I mean, how bad is that?
Oh,
At the
I hate
station.
that.
So we took them in. One lady took one home, and we decided to keep the other as a station pet. So it has a 2-bedroom condominium that is very warm outside and cozy. And we had a Persian that came up and joined us. He's real skittish, but we don't know where he came from. But he's beginning to trust us. So, but there's always a cat population at the TV station. So
That's cool. Yeah, I've got two, and this is Cece. She makes her appearance often on WeatherBrains, but she's my special needs kitty. She has chronic kidney disease, but I've babied her for about 5 years now. She's hanging in there. She's pretty perky.
wow. Awesome. All right, so let me see here. Let me do one more quick thing. Kind of promote the show because most people are not used to us being on the air at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning.
That's right.
Okay, Zoom will not work for them, so he is going to dial in using the Zoom dial-in number.
What?
It says it fails every time they go to. It says, "Oops, something has broken."
Wow.
And it's obviously the link we're in, so it's working.
Wow.
And I did order breakfast, James, and it's not a pizza, but it's a salmon bagel. So that's that Elle brought me. So I guess you could make fun of me.
So Jen, Bill has a salmon bagel.
I see that.
You have to stick your lower lip out when you. I had never had a
Oh,
salmon
my.
bagel in my entire life. You have to squint
Yes.
your eyes and stick your lower lip out and raise your pinky.
You don't have to do that
mean-
if you're wearing a top hat, by the way.
But this is all I got right here. I mean,
Cheese
this is the best I can do. Yeah.
Mine
Aw.
wins. But
Peanut butter crackers. Wow.
I win.
All right, we'll hang tight. We're live on the YouTubes here. So, and for those that don't know, in the pre-show, we do three things here during the pre-show only. We share boring personal stories. You just got a good one there. Humorous anecdotes, and occasionally we say really outrageous things. So that's what this is all about. If you want to get to the beginning of the show, move the slider about 5 minutes in, and you will get to the actual content. Although some people
Maybe.
watch the pre-show and then they hang up when the show starts. Oh boy!
Uh,
I thought
do
I'd
have
silenced
something,
unknown callers.
Yeah, I have something fun to share about tornado talk, if I could, whenever.
is
And
it
you wanna-
boring?
No, it's
Well, if it's
exciting.
boring, you have to share it now.
It has to be boring. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what we do.
Well,
Yeah.
no, it's not boring. It's actually exciting.
Then you can't share it.
Okay. I won't share now then.
No, so I try and keep my phone on this silence unknown callers, but if I know that somebody is calling me, from a different number. I have to turn that thing off. So this thing rings all day with, scammers. And here's the trick. Here's a really good trick. This is a usable trick. Get you a free Google Voice number. Doesn't cost anything. Go to Google Voice, get you a free number, and put that on everything. When you're filling out forms, or you buy something and they need your number, put that Google Voice number on everything. And that way, I get at least 50 spam calls a day on the Google Voice number, and I never see it. I could answer if I choose to, but I've got the ringer off. It goes straight to voicemail, and that eliminates a little bit of the spam traffic on the regular phone here. So
that's a good idea.
That is my one way of eliminating spam. Ooh, Kim is with us in the morning, Kim.
Yeah, it was a rush to the finish this morning with the kiddos, getting them out the door, but I have made it. Succeeded.
Awesome. We have to move the show to 9 a.m. every week.
I feel like I need to be a morning disc jockey. Hey, it's in the morning, Monday in the morning at 9:03. Your time and traffic on the 8s here.
G100. So it looks like we have Dennis and Ken on the line. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
That's awesome. Yeah, we hear you fine. Can you hear us okay? Yeah.
Oh, loud and clear. I tried my best with the Zoom and failed.
Well, that's not the first time we've said that.
Ken, we've learned that the higher the IQ, the harder it is to get on these group calls. So that places you in a very high intelligence quotient area.
But I tell you, I tried to. 3 computers here, and they all blocked me.
Wow.
The
Firewall.
Noah firewall.
I tried the link. I tried everything, but man, it's so nice to hear some familiar voices. Nice to hear you all.
Sure is.
All right, let's get this thing started here, so we don't miss any good stuff here. So here's recorder 1, here's recorder 2, and here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, the weekly podcast all about weather. Longest running weather podcast in the universe. This is episode number 788 for the 22nd of February, 2021. It's a morning special for those that happen to be watching live. We are doing this in the morning. So Jen, you're an in the morning person. You do morning radio. So
I do. That's right.
For you.
Yeah, I prefer the mornings actually. So this is great. Good to see everybody bright and early.
Yeah, I'm typically no good at night. I mean, the worst product I do is the late news on television. It comes on at 10 o'clock Central Time. My mouth is moving, but my brain is shut down. Yeah. In the morning, I'm actually good. I am actually good. So we'll see if we can make this show flow here. Kim is with us. Kim, you made it. Welcome.
I did. Good morning. I really appreciate, by the way, that you are a morning person, James, because I see your content come through early in the morning on social media when I'm up with one of my 2 children, as I was very early this morning. I can always count on you to be a bright, sunny morning person to welcome me to the day.
And moms, you're a morning person now by default. You will always be a morning person. You'll be a late night person. You will be around the clock person. Moms never sleep. They are magical.
Yes.
But Bill Murray, let's just get right to it and bring in our special guest. I'm excited about this episode for our morning show here.
Yeah, first I got to introduce Bruce Jones, who's our sponsor from Midland Radio. We just invited him to join early today since we have a special show, and I'm glad you could join us, Bruce. How are things where you are?
Things are good. I'm on the 2nd floor here in Kansas City, and the snow is gradually evaporating, receding, going away, vanishing, exactly what we hoped for.
I thought you had to go to the 2nd floor because the 1st floor had been covered by snow, but hopefully that's not the case.
Not quite that bad. Not quite.
Well, we're so happy you're here. We'll be excited to have you join in and ask Ken lots of questions. But this morning's Yes WeatherBrain needs no introduction. He appeared last year on August 27, 2015, on the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Back then, he was the MIC at the National Weather Service in Slidell. Of course, now he's the director of the National Hurricane Center. Ken Graham, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great hearing your voice.
Well, it's great hearing your voice. I can't believe it's been almost 5.5, almost 6 years since we had you on here. Special thanks to Dennis Feltgen for getting us on here. So getting you on the air here, we tried back in the late part of the 2020, but I figured you were going into hibernation at that point, Ken, after this hurricane season that we had.
Yeah, it's interesting. You started looking back at it, just knowing that we were going to talk this morning. I brought up some of the records, and it's just 2 slides full of records that were set in 2020. So yeah, just incredible to look back at it. What an incredible historic season.
Well, if we were having the show at 8:00 at night, we would ask James if we could play a drinking game with all those records, but we probably wouldn't make it to 10 o'clock. So I'm gonna toast with my cranberry juice this morning, and we'll talk about some of those records. So everybody get your juice. I've got my salmon bagel. James has already made fun of me in the pre-show. Here for my salmon bagel.
In fact, Simply Bori suggested that the show title should be "Stick Your Lower Lip Out," which is I said that on the pre-show because Bill, here I am. I've got some peanut butter crackers here. Okay, so this is my breakfast. Bill has a salmon bagel being served in his estate over there. So stick your lower lip out and squint your eyes and raise your pinky for his breakfast. So there you go.
And Elle just continues to bring me food. So now I have a cheese bagel. So
what is this? Some kind of breakfast buffet here? I mean,
James. Hey, James. This is Ken. Hey. Hearing all this, I think I need to get on some sort of app to get some food delivered. I feel kind of left out.
Yeah, me and you both, brother. I mean, my peanut butter crackers here. I mean, how lame is that? Wow.
And this special edition of WeatherBrains is brought to you by Grubhub. So
exactly. Yes.
So Ken, I don't think we spent enough time last time we talked to you, understanding how you got into weather. That's always fun for us to hear. What got you in this crazy business?
And it was interesting. I look back at grade school, and by the way, my favorite planet is Earth. And I think it's always been that way. So as a kid, talking to my mom, who will be coming to visit, by the way, hopefully soon, as soon as we get everybody able to. And so she told me I took observations every day. I wrote on my calendar. This was probably 5-6 years old. I looked outside and there was nothing official. It was sunny, it was cloudy, it was hot, it was cold, it was rainy, and I took observations every single day. And I really didn't know meteorology was a profession. It was just something, it was an obsession. I just was so fascinated by it. And several times being evacuated as a kid, growing up in Arizona, evacuated, and I didn't understand why. It was a flood. The river came out of its banks. It was, the dangers of flooding. And looking back on it, it was leftover tropical moisture coming up through Mexico into Arizona. And I just was fascinated by the weather ever since then. And got the degree and went to University of Arizona and then Mississippi State, and just favorite planet. Just absolutely fascinated with the Earth. And then not just the science part, right? It's James, you and I have talked about it before, and Bill, and actually all of us. It's not just the science part of it, it's the communication part. It's translating that science to something that's actionable to save lives. That became such a passion from day one, working on television and then into the weather service almost 27 years ago. The rest is history, but still is a passion today as it was when I was 5 years old.
I muted myself there. Sorry about that. I forgot I did it. Nate Johnson has joined us, Ken. So I want to say hello to Nate this morning, coming to us from Raleigh.
Morning.
And, we've been comparing breakfasts over here, and I'm currently the leader in the clubhouse with a salmon bagel, Nate. So other than the abuse I have taken for it so far, that's the news so far. But so Ken, you did some television, and I didn't know that. Maybe Nate knew that, but where were you on television?
WCBI, not too far from where y'all are at there, James and others. And yeah, WCBI in Columbus, Mississippi. So going to graduate school at Mississippi State, I worked at WCBI. I did the midday and weekends over there. So that was just a great experience.
Did you know that, James, man?
I did. Ken is a legend in Columbus, Mississippi. I mean, if you go to Columbus or Starkville or Tupelo and say, I know Ken Graham, they will let you in. You'll get a discount. You'll get the best seat in the restaurant. You're kind of a big deal. So he's like the Elvis of the Golden Triangle.
I remember when their current studio, the first day it was open, moving from the old building in a pasture, basically. So I remember when that place was brand new. It's interesting.
Yeah, the new, as I say, new. It's of course it's not new anymore, but the new studio is downtown. The old one was out there by their tower in a cow pasture. So, but anyway, Columbus is a great weather market. I mean, goodness, think about the variety of weather you get in Columbus, Mississippi. Wow, you get tropical, winter, severe storms, tornadoes, heat waves, droughts, you name it, you got it. What an incredible weather market.
And this year, dying tropical cyclones.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to look back at the season 2020 and something that we probably don't spend enough time talking about. It's not just right on the coast. It's the leftovers, right? It's where all that moisture goes. Does it interact with a front to cause significant flash flooding? And the wind. You look at some of these deteriorating storms. It can produce an incredible amount of wind well inland. So it's one of those safety things we talk about. It's not, these hurricanes are not just coastal. Even folks well inland need to be prepared for those. It's the wind, it's the rain, it's all those type of impacts.
And I lose track. James, was it Zeta that brought all the really high winds to central Alabama?
Yes,
after landfall.
That was Zeta. That was Zeta.
That was some amazing winds, Ken, all the way up into parts of Chilton, Shelby counties here in Alabama. There was lots of damage. Because that storm was a very fast-moving storm when it made landfall. So it maintained a small core of winds all the way up into here that really caused a lot of problems.
And it's interesting you bring up the fast-moving storm versus the slow. It's one thing looking back over the years, and especially now in this job, it becomes a little cliche that we say every storm is different. It just couldn't ring more true. I mean, you think about a fast-moving storm, how quickly you could get those winds, far inland, hundreds of miles inland. Then you got the slow-moving storms that bring, the rainfall, the copious amount of rainfall because they're moving so slowly. You have some storms that keep a solid structure. Laura was the forecast for Laura was pretty consistent throughout its lifetime. We had an incredible amount of rapid intensification in the 2020 season, and some of it near the coast. But you have other storms that the center jumps around. Sally comes to mind, where the center was jumping around several centers at once, and it jumps, and that impacts the forecast. Every one of these is so different. I think that's one thing. I mean, I did know that, being in New Orleans for so long, but you get to see more of them in this job and really look at them internationally and domestically.
Ken, when we chatted in 2015, we were looking back at 2005, which, had broke, several all-time records. I think 28 subtropical and tropical storms that, 27 were named, but one was found later, 15 hurricanes, 7 major hurricanes. I guess both of those may still be records, 4 category 5 storms, and of course, Katrina. But we were at that point in our third below normal season in a row, and it had been 10 years since there had been a U.S. major landfall. So we knew that all good things were going to come to an end, and it kind of did the following year, I guess, in 2016.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, you start looking at, the activity that we've had several years in a row. I mean, you look at 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, just significant amount of activity. And, it's interesting to look at the different seasons. You look at active seasons where there are a significant amount of storms, but if they recurve, you can minimize those impacts. But other seasons, for instance, 2005 or even 2020, where the landfalls, I mean, I think that's something that, we don't think about often in some of these seasons. The number of landfalls are incredible. Looking at the United States, if you look at the U.S. landfalls, this is just one of the interesting statistics. There were 9 landfalls in 1916. I mean, that was pretty significant. And then in 2020, 12 landfalls. So a record for the number of landfalls, and especially the Gulf of Mexico. 8 landfalls in the Gulf of Mexico is just absolutely significant. 5 of those for Louisiana.
Yeah, that's just what's crazy. Louisiana has just had it coming and going for the last couple of years, and especially this year. Some of the power outages and things were unbelievable, record power outages. And then, we kind of prepared for all that again with the winter storm coming, and fortunately, it didn't hit us hard from a power outage standpoint. But there were parts of Louisiana that were without power for a long period of time. Not to mention the Lake Charles area with Laura, that it was out for weeks, I'm sure. But if you go back to 2017, it became a big year. Harvey, Irma, of course, Maria, and then our namesake storm, or for our guy Nate here, all were well forecast. But did Rick just pack it up after that year and say, "I see what's coming, and I'm getting the heck out of Dodge"? Ken, what was the deal?
I don't know. All I know is, we, sitting in Slidell, of course, with 5 landfalls in Louisiana is definitely a crazy season. But you may deal with a couple storms per season, and that's the other interesting thing about this job too, is they're all mine. So it's interesting that you pretty much get them all. So you get to see them from a different perspective. But the other part interesting that I probably never considered as much, being in Slidell for so long, is our coverage goes from you look over to Europe and the African coast all the way to 140 degrees west in the Pacific. That's a huge area. So it's not just domestic, but the international coordination, all the countries through the World Meteorological Organization. We've developed just incredible relationships with these countries. We collaborate with them. We talk to them. We coordinate watches and warnings, and with the forecast that we issue. So that's a part of it that that's a lot of storms. So basically, not just the U.S. but all those other countries as well really makes for quite a few storms. But this year, some of those countries in Central America, now you start looking at Honduras, Nicaragua, they really got hit hard with some of these storms. Even with notice, even with a good forecast, there's still such a big impact. And most of the time, that just becomes the impacts of water, just too much rain, landslides, and there's still a lot of work to do to be able to get that information out well ahead of time.
Do all of those countries, Ken, in Central America that are so hurricane prone, do they all or some or a few of them have their own meteorological services that are coordinate with you? And how does that work?
Yeah, they do. And so during a tropical situation, we'll actually have conference calls with them, coordinating the forecast and looking at timing. A lot of it's timing. It's putting up the watches and warnings for those countries. They do that. We do the forecast. In some cases, we back up the watch and warning responsibility for some countries, but they issue their own warnings, but we issue the forecast. So we talk to them. We talk about impacts. We talk about forward speed. We were talking about a fast one versus a slower storm, looking at that data and really trying to help with some of those impacts. So the collaboration is incredible. And part of that WMO group, it's Region 4. We actually have a hurricane committee where we meet once a year, and that's the place that we come up with the operations plan, the technical plan, and the countries propose which names to retire. And then we actually, people propose, the different countries propose the new names, and it's a vote. I count the hands of all the countries, and we come up with the new names in that meeting. So it's been that's an incredible thing, but it's interesting. The relationships become very tight with these countries because we're all in this together to save lives.
Kim's got a question for you, Ken, so I'll pass to her for a second.
Hey, Ken, speaking about those Central America landfalls, I feel like this got either lost in the news because so much was happening, of course, here and around the world at the time of this hurricane season. But when the hurricanes were impending in off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua, there was a lot of concern that this could be like Mitch in, I believe, 1998, where there were very severe impacts, huge loss of life from especially the flooding, these tropical cyclones just sort of sitting over the mountainous terrain and dumping so much rain and causing mudslides. So obviously, the Central American countries are even further destabilized now than they were in the 90s, just politically. And that's something that's potentially familiar to many of us and something to think about when something like this is going to happen. From your perspective, had you had much information about what the impacts were and how this event potentially compared to Mitch?
Yeah, I think one thing that was pretty striking is fewer fatalities. There were still fatalities from the 2020 season from these systems, but not like Mitch. And I think there's been some progress. and getting the information out to people. There was a lot of time on these as well. I mean, the double whammy storms that happened in Louisiana, it also happened in Central America where they hit, so close to each other, several storms in a row. And I think there was enough lead time in that forecast that they were able to take some precautions. And it was a good communication with us and those Met departments and really trying to talk about some of those impacts. So still lost a life, but at the same time, there was enough advance warning that people were able to take some actions. And so it's not easy either, because where do you go? Even inland with the terrain, you start talking about mudslides. So they have their own particular challenges on how to do that. But I think in this case, it just seemed like the warning process, the heads up, the communication worked really well. And that's something we're going to continue to improve. We have our next WMO meeting in, let's see, I'm looking at my calendar, in March. And we're going to talk about those storms. We're going to talk about lessons learned. What could we do better? Do we think about the technology of having video calls? How do we collaborate? Do we show maps? Do we show potential forecasts and collaborate with those countries? So we're always looking to get better. And I think we're on the right track, but I think there's even further room to collaborate even more. So yeah, loss of life, but not quite the extent of Mitch. And I think a lot of it is just some of those advancements. We have one saying, you probably, I know you've heard the, Weather Ready Nation, but in the WMO, we're working on Weather Ready Nations. And it's talking about capabilities, observations, communication with the public, social science. We're dedicating a full day in our WMO meeting to social science, which I'm incredibly excited about. So I think it's working. It's not perfect. And I think there's just so much room to continue to grow with all these countries.
That's wonderful. Gosh, talk about a much needed bit of good news in a really crappy year. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That had been sort of my impression, because there wasn't as much reporting as one might have expected, but especially amid the challenging year that 2020 was, that just shows in spades everything you're talking about and how successful these efforts have likely been. Thank you.
What's fascinating too, I love the question and I love the program because you could just think and, you don't know what you're going to say next. And it's nice to have this platform. And, something I just thought of, I want to share this because it's fascinating to me. When we talk about the warning process, you talk about the social science, you sit in this room with all these countries, 28 different nations. And it fascinates me that despite political boundaries, despite differences in politics, despite all that and different cultures, when it comes down to the social science, it's all similar. It's trying to take a good forecast, translate that into something that's actionable, not by just officials, but the public. And they're all struggling with the same thing. How do we get people to listen? How do we get people to listen to those impacts and heed those warnings, go to the shelters? It's real fascinating how we're all dealing with the same thing. Despite all those differences, we have the same social science when it comes down to, when it comes to meteorology, when it comes to weather and the impacts of the tropical season.
Ken, you talked about the Region 4 and the Hurricane Committee and whatnot. And one of the things that was an issue last year was we ran out of names and we had to plow through a significant portion of the Greek alphabet. And one of the ideas that came out of last year was, hey, how about instead of going to the Greek alphabet, we change the way we do this and potentially just run into the next year's list and sort of do like some of the Pacific regions do, where they're just multiple lists. And we just pick up on the list from the previous year where we left off last year. It ditches the Greek alphabet, makes things a little more contiguous. And also we don't have to worry about, well, geez, what happens if we have to retire a letter out of the Greek alphabet, which, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Any thoughts on that from a U.S. Weather Service perspective? And is that anything that, potentially is going to get an audience regionally?
Yep, and it will, because I'm bringing it up. I'm definitely going to bring up this topic. We have some time on our agenda to talk about it. And I agree that there's a couple things when I look back at running out of names. I mean, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it becomes somewhat of a distraction. There was so much concentration on the Greek alphabet. Were we really paying attention to the impacts of the system instead of just the name. I mean, you bring up the point of retiring Greek alphabet names. How do you do that? That's pretty interesting because we've got some candidates this year, right? I mean, if you look at the list, we've got some candidates for retirement when it comes to the Greek alphabet. So how does that work? So, but the other part that we need to talk about was an issue is the Greek alphabet didn't translate well into other languages. So we have to deal with not just English, but we're dealing with Spanish and French, Portuguese, just some of the languages that with the different countries that we're dealing with. Some of those names didn't translate well. They were very difficult for some of the countries to get through some of those names. So we are looking at it. I'm going to bring it up. I think there's, the solution that you proposed, but there's also opportunities. You just have an alternate name list. That's a possibility as well. So I think what we're going to do is throw some things on the table, see what everybody thinks. So stay tuned. Maybe we can get back on the program here, and I can talk about how that went and any decisions that we make. But stay tuned. I think some change may be on the way, and I think it's necessary, especially from a social science perspective, because if the name doesn't translate, it becomes a distraction when you're trying to get the impacts across.
And I know that even here in the United States, the way I think science and mathematicians pronounce some of these Greek letters and the way native Greek speakers who live in the United States pronounce them is very different. And that's sort of a lesser than, sort of the English, Spanish, Portuguese, that sort of thing. But that point is well taken, and not one that I had actually considered at the time in terms of how to process and how we communicate this sort of thing. And I think your point about it was a distraction once we slipped into the Greek alphabet list. And then when we started having some storms that looked like they were going to be candidates, that when we really want the focus to be laser focused on what this particular storm is going to do and where it's going to go and who's going to be affected and what they need to do about it, you really want to clear the brush out of the way and have people really be laser focused on that. So yeah, we're definitely curious to see how that turns out. And I just I propose what I propose mostly because it's something that other basins use. We're not plowing to ground. It's not anything radical. And it helps to, in that way, the Atlantic Basin is sort of a one-off. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, how many different ways did we hear some of the pronunciations, like Ada? I heard Ada. I heard several different, 2 or 3 different pronunciations of that one. So that became this debate about how to pronounce it rather than focusing on the impact.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we need to tackle.
And if we hadn't had Nate, we wouldn't have known how to pronounce Isaias for sure. Nate coached us a couple of weeks in advance on that. So Kim, you wanted to throw something in, or maybe we answered it in the course of that discussion.
Well, you actually just mentioned Ada. I believe was that the first Central American landfall? Was Ada? How did those translate to the Central American populations? Was that a stumbling block?
Yeah, that one there wasn't one of the more difficult ones. Some of the others. But some of them even have alternate meanings. I mean, it's Ada, it has meanings, for the hurricane, but it also has meanings for other things as well. So the best part is just being able to talk about it and say, hey, let's make sure we focus on, Hurricane Ada, not just leave the name alone. So we tried to tackle that the best that we could. But I think it becomes a hindrance. It becomes a distraction, and that's the last time, we need any sort of distractions during an event that we're trying to communicate the subtleties of the impacts. And, even with, the subtleties, even a non-Greek alphabet name, you go back to Laura and trying to, remember the forecast, we had 15 to 20 foot of storm surge, and it just get goosebumps. I mean, you start looking at hurricanes in the past, what they do, the devastation of that type of storm surge. And if you remember during that event, a word matters. The word unsurvivable is a word that we used once we calculated the 15 to 20 foot of storm surge. Unsurvivable is not something that we use lightly, right? You can't use that all the time. It has to be truly unsurvivable, and that was. And some of the early readings measured around 18 foot of storm surge from Hurricane Laura. So that's the trickiness of this. It's not just the forecast. It's okay, how do we communicate that, whether it's an international partner or it's here in the U.S. you got to come up with the right words. You got to come up with that during the briefings and make sure it triggers the response that you need.
Yeah, I really appreciate this discussion. I just am in marvel of how difficult your job must be, that each season you're presented with something that you maybe had never considered before that could be a stumbling block to communication. Back with Sandy, obviously before you were in that seat, but there was a challenge for the hurricane community. The transition between tropical and extratropical became a hang-up point, and now we have this this new hang-up point with the naming convention, and just so many things that people can get tripped up on. We've confronted the Saffir-Simpson scale, and is that even a stumbling block? The way that we try to communicate about tropical hazards at a very fundamental level. So you are really at this nexus of where the social science and communication science meets the physical science in a very public eye, very public forum. That has to be really, really hard, because these issues aren't always contemplated before they happen. They kind of spring up, and then everyone has an opinion. And that's just got to be a really tough position to be in.
Well, you're going to like this. I was glad to have an opportunity with that to be able to share this. I'm excited about something we're trying to do. Everything we do, you think about, you mentioned the Saffir-Simpson scale. Well, let's talk about the cone. Everybody has opinions about all these things. Trying to show more impacts. How do we do that? Do we plot that on the cone? Do we remember the cone's based on the average error over the last 5 years. So if we do a good job, your cone gets smaller, which means there's more impacts outside the cone. So you get that confusion. I'm outside the cone. Do I have some impacts? If we have a couple rough years, that cone will get bigger, right? So that's the type of stuff that we deal with. So we have approximately 9 social science projects that we have going on as we speak. We're going to get so much data. I think it's going to be data overload, but that's okay. We're looking at the cone. We're looking at our website. We're looking at all of these aspects of the tropical program and how we can put more social science into the products that we issue. So we're still focusing on a good track forecast. We're still focusing on getting better with the intensity forecast. And by the way, that's rough. We had significant amount of rapid intensification storms. You look back at Michael, you look at this season, I've got a list of them here. There's a bunch. 9 tropical systems this year, cyclones in the Atlantic in 2020 went through rapid intensification. Just incredible that's going on. So with all that in mind, we're going to take that social science. We're going to try to adjust things, but I don't want to do that in a vacuum. I think it's really important to me. I want to present this. Go to AMS, NWA, programs like this. Let's present the results and figure out the direction that we're going to go. So I'm excited about it. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think we're on the right track, at least getting the data that we need to make any changes.
So Ken, go back to Laura for a minute. Obviously an outstanding forecast that literally was where it was supposed to be at the time of landfall, according to the forecast. But first, there was after it was over, there was some controversy over the surge. You mentioned your 15 to 20 foot forecast, and it verified, but there was initially some consternation on social media about that. That had to frustrate you and the forecasters, or is that just water off a duck's back?
No, yeah, it does. Absolutely. Because, it was a good forecast, not just the track, not just the intensity, but also the storm surge is a very good forecast. And I think what happens is there's a reason, if you look at storm surge and why we use a probabilistic approach. Okay. So, and the reason is small changes, little changes in that storm can make a big difference in the amount of storm surge. In Laura, if you think about this system, we did some modeling, and we actually moved Laura 20 miles further west. There were areas that had a delta, a change in storm surge, that were 10 to 15 foot difference, 10 to 15 feet. Think about that, and just moving this storm 20 miles. So what happened was where Laura hit, it spared. I mean, it's still a lot of wind. There was still storm surge, but Lake Charles didn't get the brunt of that surge. It was further to the east. 20 miles difference, and all that storm surge would have went into Lake Charles. So That's why we do a probabilistic approach. And I'm not sure everybody always understands that aspect of it. And if you're 24 hours out, we do the best we can, but a little wiggle, a little wobble, you get 10, 15, 20 miles in either direction. It happens. A little eye wall replacement, the dang thing jumps, and all of a sudden you get a place that you could get 10 foot of storm surge 15, and they actually get 3, or they would have got 3 with the one storm, and then it ended up being 10 to 15. That's why we don't mess with that. There's lives on the line here. So yeah, that was the controversy. It was the storm hit. There was still around 18 foot measured, by the way, of storm surge. It was just a little bit east of Lake Charles. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness. Mm-hmm. But that's the part of this that I'm not sure everybody always understands. It's nice to look at what happened afterwards. We got to make that call 5-7 days ahead of time.
And it's terrible to think about those communities like Cameron, Holly Beach, those places right there. They've taken such a brunt over the decades. Ken, Audrey, Rita, now Laura and Delta. Those communities on the Mississippi River like Buras and Boothville and Pilot Town, they are just about gone. Do you see that happening on the Southwest Louisiana coast eventually? Those towns just continue to dry up, or is the perseverance there to make it through?
I think we always try to rebuild. I mean, we always definitely try to do that, but you start getting the combination of sea level rise, and you start getting a combination of multiple storms and active period of hurricanes. It makes it tough. I mean, it was listening to some folks that were cleaning up after Laura and then get hit again. I mean, that becomes pretty rough, and it gets back to the whole topic of resiliency along the coast. I mean, if you think about the forecast is getting better. We've talked about that. I think our communication of the actual impacts is getting better. So we continue to do a better job. I mean, I think all of us are working better than ever, in my opinion, during the heat of the battle. We're all talking, we're all getting the information out. But the reality is, from a resiliency aspect, you got more people along the coast. You think about our vulnerability along the U.S. coastline continues to become more vulnerable as we have so many people on the coast. So it's just something we got to keep working towards it. We're working so hard here. It's tough. We're trying to. Everybody wants us to, and you're right. Everybody has an opinion. We're desperately trying to get a 6 and 7 day forecast. We get some criticism for having only a 5-day forecast, but here's the problem. You can go back and look at the track for Florence, and it looks excellent. Man, wow, you all did a great job. But if you go to day 6 and 7 in the models, they actually recurved Hurricane Florence headed to the Carolinas, recurved it back into the Atlantic right before a holiday weekend. So if there was a forecast that indicated that, you think about everybody going on their holiday weekend, and then all of a sudden there's only about 3 or 4 days notice on Florence. So it gets tricky to communicate the forecast when you start getting further out the error. If the errors could be 1,000 miles, how do you communicate that and get an appropriate response? So yeah, I think the resiliency conversation needs to continue. You think about a lot of places, repetitive getting repeated, getting hit. I lived in Louisiana for a long time. Folks are so resilient. It's still considered home to me. But yeah, you get too many storms, you get too many impacts. It really makes it rough to be in areas like that. It's tough.
Ken, you touched on the models.
Yeah, go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
Yeah, you touched on the models going 7 days out and whatnot. And I know that the Hurricane Center is working on, and at least internally, a 7-day forecast. Any idea when that might become public, and are there thoughts about maybe even going beyond that? And I asked that largely because at AMS in Phoenix 2 years ago, I sat on a panel, actually moderated a panel, and one of the emergency managers from South Florida said, we need longer forecasts because the people, the social meteorologists out there are looking at some of those same models, and they're putting out some of these presentations. And, wouldn't it be great to have something official from the Hurricane Center to actually cover that period out in time? So 2 questions. Number one, how's the 7-day forecast going internally? Do we expect to see that anytime soon? And are there plans to even go beyond that in some sort of official way, whether it's an official point lat long forecast or maybe here's the area that we're looking at, beyond the 7-day window.
Yeah, we're close. I think it's something we definitely want to do, and I think it's interesting because when I worked in New Orleans in the Slidell office, I wanted it bad because if you think about timelines, I mean, hurricanes are interesting. They don't really care about your timeline. So some of them you get 2 to 3 day notice on a strong hurricane, or you can get 7-10 days. So we want to go further out in time. I think what I learned after coming here was, how do you show it? How do you trigger the right response 7 days out? And going back to Florence, when the models are showing recurve, do we is it a giant cone? Is there a different way we can look at it? So I'm hoping some of the social science data is going to come back to show us how to show that. How do you do this when the error could be 1,000 miles? Others behave better, right? I mean, you can always find the examples that behave better. That's an easy part of this discussion. But what do you do with the ones that aren't? One thing about, let's go back to the LoRa that I thought was pretty interesting. Do you all remember that we're a day or so out, and the models started, especially the European model, started trying to shift furthest to the west towards Houston. Houston was ready to evacuate. I mean, they were ready. I mean, it was just looking at that, and we in those discussions and that coordination, the IDSS, the decision support that's provided, it's like, well, hold on, we're seeing that, but let's get through another model run. There's still time, and indeed they came back, especially with some of the aircraft data that we got in there, the synoptic from the actual the jet. Some of the synoptic data came in, and I think it helped out the models. I really do. But we were just getting so much aircraft data into the models. So, getting back on subject here, look, we want to do it. I think it gets to how do we show that without adding to the hype? Does that make sense? It's tricky. It really is tricky, and I think we want to do it. We're getting there, but how do you show that on a map?
Look, Ken, this is Kim again. This is a fascinating point, and I can appreciate the pressure that you're feeling to have a 6 to 7 day product, and but also Nate's point about the communication landscape kind of forcing the hand on this. It would kind of, I think, if the Hurricane Center says nothing, that could leave a really significant void, especially since we know some of these social meteorologists have a wide following, and sometimes to combat disinformation, you need to at least be present in the communication ecosystem. But as you've highlighted, there are just really big challenges. I'm wondering if I could follow up on something you sort of suggested a little bit, that maybe there's something different that could be done to render that potential in the 6 to 7 day space, other than just extending the cone. Because while the cone does try to communicate uncertainty in some way, it's all about just your historic error. It's not really about, in this situation, what the track uncertainty is, because you start with the best guess single track forecast and then build the cone around that. I'm wondering if this 6 to 7 day product, have you guys contemplated doing something different where it's just maybe a more generalized, like, here's the entire region that could be affected, or something that really conveys the uncertainty of placement, because you don't want people to anchor to something. I think that's the fear, is that if you would have said 6 to 7 days out, if you would have suggested, oh, well, this could actually go out to sea, people might anchor to that, and then you pull the track back toward land, and people see you as less credible, or they've made some series of poor judgments based on that. It might be better for decision makers to actually know that this is really, really fuzzy and they have to stay tuned, than to think that there is actually an ability to in any way forecast precisely some sort of track that far out. Sorry, I know that was kind of a ramble, but I'm curious to know what the thinking has been, because I'm sure there has been some.
Lots of discussion, absolutely, and the anchoring thing is so real. I mean, it's interesting how many times you see that anchoring on that initial piece of information. And Michael comes to mind. There was significant anchoring with Michael, seeing the system kind of disorganized early, and a lot of uncertainty associated with it, and then all of a sudden end up being a Category 5 storm. Only 4 Category 5 storms in the continental United States in history, every single one of them was a tropical storm 3 days prior. That's scary. So that's the type of stuff that we look at. So, you think about the social science. So what are we going to get? I mean, we have discussions about, is the average error the best way to do a cone? Or is it better to start looking at dynamic cone, where you actually have some model consistency, the data is getting there, you're comfortable with it, and the cone's smaller. And I'm talking further out, not just short term, but what we're talking about here, day 6 and 7. And so, dynamic cone, do you show it differently when you have a lot of model spread? I mean, some storms, all the models just seem to come together. Other storms are all over the place. How do we show that? I mean, people are looking at the models anyway, right? Like you were saying, I mean, they're looking at it anyway. We need to be a part of that conversation, and that's what we're striving towards. And I think there's no debate here that we're going to go to 6 and 7 days. I think the debate is how to show it, how to best show it. And we do talk about it in our, the decision support briefings when we talk to the states and we talk to the emergency managers. We are talking about things that far out. We do weekly briefings with, whether it's a tropical system or not, we're still having those conversations with the decision makers. So yeah, I'm all on board with this. It's just how to show it. And I think we're getting closer, especially with all this data starting to come in.
That's great. Thank you. I love the idea of dynamic cone. Of all of the, the social science has been done on misinterpretations of the cone. It's my impression that one of the biggest hangups is precisely what a dynamic cone might try to address, that people think the uncertainty you're visualizing is the inherent uncertainty of this storm. And that's not true. It's the uncertainty of just how good you guys have been at forecasting hurricanes in the past in general. So it could be that you actually are really confident in your track forecast for a hurricane, that it will do exactly this within 20 miles and you've nailed it 5 days out. Or it could be that you have something that, depending on, of a passing system in the Midwest, could either pull the tropical system along and it could head to Florida, or it could, not get pulled by the trough and head into Texas, completely divergent solutions. And then you guys are in this impossible position of having to decide one thing to hedge some way and then create the cone around that. And it's just not what people infer that you mean. So I love this idea of at least moving toward a consideration of visualizing uncertainty of the storm itself, which would then involve itself with some of the, taking in the model inputs and everything else. It could actually be made material. So very fascinating to hear that you're moving that direction. I'm sure that a lot of people would really applaud that move.
Well, and you can't, and one thing that's, when I got the job, I remember saying this was, I get, there's a lot of opinions. I have my own, and you can't just radically just throw everything out the door. People still recognize things like the Saffir-Simpson scale and the cone. So how do you move towards something that does a better job communicating those impacts? Because if you think about the Saffir-Simpson scale and some of the criticism there really is, especially with the Saffir-Simpson scale, when you're decreasing in wind velocity. So for example, Florence, you start looking at a category 4 and moving towards a category 2, but the impacts didn't change because the structure of the storm, the size of the storm has so much to do with the impacts. The bigger the storm, the more the storm surge. Independent of velocity, the bigger the storm, the more the storm surge. So how do you communicate that structure, the size of the storm, and you think about impacts? But in a Michael, you start ramping up that Saffir-Simpson scale. You start getting some of the response that you want. So this is a gradual process. I just got to do it very open with everything. I think, with COVID, not having some of these conferences, the hallway conversations, right, where we after the conference is over, we sit around the table and we talk about some of these things. I miss that, but we definitely want to do this whole entire thing very openly with everybody involved, because we got to go to there together. You can't, when a lot of the studies I've seen from social science, if people get conflicting information, different type of information, you don't get the response that you want. So we got to be in this together in whatever we do. And I wanted to say one other thing that's really important, and especially came true with the whole pandemic. You take the accuracy, you really start looking at this cone, you really start looking at the impacts. We want people to evacuate, but remember, we're also working on people not evacuating, right? If you think about, you go back in time and you see storms that millions of people evacuated, and you can see ones that it was definitely warranted. But if you think about a situation, Floyd comes to mind just randomly. In 1999, 2.6 million people evacuated in Floyd. A very similar track was Dorian, and as many as 3 million people did not evacuate. And especially with this pandemic, you don't want too many people in shelter. So people lose their lives even in the evacuation process. So I wanted to bring that up because it's not just getting people to evacuate, it's also appropriate response in these systems to keep people, keep them safe as well.
All right, Jen, I know you want to take us in a slightly different direction now for a moment, because that was a great conversation. And we're going to lose Kim in a few minutes. And Ken, I'll ask you, do you have a hard out at any point this morning, or can we go
this
noon,
is way
12,
over
1 o'clock?
This is way overdue. I was looking forward to this for a while, so I'm glad we're finally talking.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Jen because I know she's got an exciting direction she wants to take our questioning for a minute that I know our listeners will love.
Yeah, this is Jennifer Narramore. Ken, it's great to meet you. I wanted to have you kind of explore, maybe you could take us on a virtual tour of the National Hurricane Center, what it's like to work there, and just the operational structure. What are the different roles of the forecasters, all the employees there? And I know for me as a middle schooler who lived in Central Florida back in the 80s, my big thing was tracking the hurricanes officially on the grocery store maps. So do folks still do hand analysis and track, just old school with a paper? I'd just like to kind of get just what is it like to work there? I'd love to visit sometime, but maybe you could kind of give us a virtual visit here.
Well, first of all, we'd be happy to host you. So I hope you can come by. I would love to give you the tour. No, it's an incredible place. It's, I've said it so many times. I reflect on even working here, and it just humbles me because everybody here is so dedicated. Everybody wants to do the best job that they can. But the aspects of it is we've got some different branches here. So you got the hurricane specialists. They're the ones that are doing the cone, right? They're doing the cone that we just talked about. They're doing the hurricane forecast. They're trying to look at all the model data and blend it together. You remember, interesting enough, there's so much focus on that model did this, that model's doing this. We blend 100 of them together. We have ensembles of each one of those models. So the specialists are taking the models, using meteorology and hand analysis. They are still using paper. They're using paper, and there are lots of protractors as we speak out in operation. So there's still some of that traditional meteorology that goes on, which is amazing. So they're doing that. At the same time, we have the tropical analysis forecast branch. We have an incredible group of people here that are doing the marine forecast. So if you think about the dangers of a tropical system or even a winter low on shipping, you think about, you look at all the ships on the oceans, it looks like air traffic control. I mean, there's so many ships out there. So they're issuing the marine forecast for a huge area over the Atlantic and back into the Pacific. So they're 24/7 constantly looking at that, and they brief the Coast Guard during tropical systems, providing that decision support. But that's not all. If you move on, we also have FEMA. We have 2 people from FEMA that are here that really help us with some of the video briefings with FEMA and some of the states and emergency managers. They're here as kind of a bridge. We talked about the social science. They're a bridge between that scientific forecast and the actions that are taken by emergency management. So we have them as well. But here's another part that I don't think a lot of people realize is also in the building. We talk about the hurricane hunters, both the Air Force at Keesler Air Force Base and the NOAA hurricane hunters over at Lakeland, Florida, with the 10 C-130s for the Air Force, and we got 2 P-3s with NOAA, and also the Gulfstream, the high-level jet. All that is coordinated out of here. So we actually have 3 DoD employees here that actually what they do is they're in a room, they run data back and forth between the specialists, and they're communicating with those aircraft. We have a plan of the day, which is actually for the next day, We route the planes. We talk about where the drop zones are going to occur. It's all plotted out on maps by hand. And all that's coordinated out of this building, or we can't find a center, or there's 3 centers. Where do you want the plane to go? They'll talk to the specialist. They'll route the plane back into different areas that look suspect on the satellite as well. So all that's coordinated out of NHC. We have the media presence, as you all see, that's right on the operations floor, right there in the middle of everything. And we have the last branch is really looking at science and technology. They're the ones that keep the computers going. They're the ones that develop these fancy products that you see. Every year they got to make those changes in those products and the website. So it's incredible, right? It's all that science, but then it's the briefings, it's the media, getting the word out. It's pretty intense. It really is intense. But one thing, just the dedication of everybody here, I just want to reiterate, it's absolutely incredible. And there's not, I don't think there's a day goes by that I'm not humbled just to be sitting here in this job.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ken. And thank you guys for all you do. We appreciate it so much, and just the hard work. I can only imagine what it's like. So thank you for taking us through that.
And Ken, one thing to add real quick too is we're in a bunker. We're in an interesting bunker in the building. I don't think when you come visit, I'd love to show it to you. We have the walls here are 10 inches thick concrete with reinforced rebar in the middle. We have shutters. This place is a fortress. So if we can keep ourselves safe, we can keep everyone else safe by keeping on going here.
But, having said that, Ken, did you have to shuttle any specialists to Washington this year during any of the hurricanes, just in case South Florida was threatened?
We did, and part of it we always had the capability to have a COOP site up in Washington, but we did something this year that was different. Because of the pandemic, we made changes early. We really said, it was, you start looking at the forecast for the season being as busy as it was, assuming that it was going to be that busy before the season, we took steps to pre-deploy. We pre-deployed a specialist up to College Park at the Weather Prediction Center, WPC, just in case. We also set up a COOP site with the Aircraft Operations Center in Lakeland, where if we had to, we could get up to Lakeland, further inland, get a little place that we can keep on going. We had cohort scheduling, to really not have, work in pairs and do shift change basically from the parking lot to make sure people didn't, minimize the amount of interaction that people have with each other. One-way hallways, we moved workstations to isolate folks. So yeah, it's interesting to look back at the 2020 season. It wasn't just incredibly busy from a season standpoint, but it was tricky because of keeping ourselves safe. You can't lose this place, right? There's a lot of folks counting on us. So we did everything that we could to ensure the safety. And in the end, it actually worked. It worked well.
Hey, Ken, it's Bruce Jones up in Kansas City. And I wanted to ask you a question. I know the emergency managers do a lot of this, these tabletop exercises where they imagine almost the worst case scenario. You mentioned using paper and pens, old school hand plotting and so forth. Do you guys ever practice what would happen if you were to lose internet connectivity or lose a satellite? Or do you go through old school forecasting practices once in a while?
Yeah, we do. I think a lot of it is, if you lose the data, you still have to put out a forecast. So we simulate that. But the other part of it is not just simulating if it happens, how to prevent it. So what is the backup? Do having a network switch, making sure there's two in case there's one failed, or getting the data, getting on a quick video call with WPC or others, or Honolulu. Look at the Pacific Hurricane Center and how we back each other up there. So yeah, we exercise that. We have a COOP plan just in case, and a lot of it is just having different ways to get in, not just depending on one line in, but having multiple lines in. If you lose everything, how do you? There's different aspects here. How do you have backup for 6 or 7 hours until we could get somebody to drive up or fly up if we had to in a big emergency to a COOP location? So we could spread that out between the Pacific Hurricane Center and also Weather Prediction Center, WPC, while we can get situated in a coop and then take over that. So we drill it, we test it before every season. We try to test that capability just in case, because there's just too much riding on this. It's not a, how do I put this? It's something to take very serious to make sure there's a continuity of that operations.
And I know there's a lot of extra expense in doing that. But as we saw in the state of Texas, sometimes if you kind of go cheap on your expenses for these black swan events, once they happen, you're really up a creek without a paddle.
Yeah, and and sometimes it's back to basics. You think about all the technology and knobology, but in a case of a coop situation, it's not like you can, I'm talking not necessarily a hurricane threat to South Florida, but I'm talking a major outage where we lose comms. So I can't, it's going to take time to fly people up to DC to get them in place. So as a result, that's why for the first time we have that other coop location in Lakeland, literally load stuff up in a van and go, right? So it's really trying to think of not just, issues associated with continuity of operations, but timescales as well. We got to get service back up. And to be honest, it's nice, especially with a South Florida, event, a threat. A lot of people don't want to be that, you don't want to be that far from your family, right? Going up to DC. So having that closer coop location is good, because people can have their families pretty close too.
Hey, Ken, I want to ask a question about the seasonal outlooks. You prepare them. Klotzbach and his team at Colorado State, they prepare them and they're issued before the season. What exactly are end users to do with that information? Let's say you live in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, or you're an emergency manager, on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. What's the main purpose of those things?
Yeah, Climate Prediction Center, James, does that up in College Park. So we're kind of a customer of it too, to be honest. So we see it. I think in general you do this. Look, a lot of especially going from in the counties and the parishes, a lot of the training, that question comes up all the time. And this is how I answer that probably every single time. Look, if it's predicted to be busy, right, you're going to get ready. It's going to be a busy season. But the issue becomes, what if it's predicted not to be busy? And do you let your guard down? There was a year when we presented that climate forecast, looking at the seasonal forecast, and it was supposed to be well below average. And I know I heard somebody in the audience go, whew, and I called it out. I don't know why I did it. I said, who did that? Nobody rose. Everybody hid. Everybody lowered their head on that one. But here's my advice. Every single year, if you're along the coast and well inland, if you could be impacted by a tropical system, I don't care if the forecast is for above average. I don't care if there's 30 storms. I don't care if there's one. You got to prepare as if you're going to be hit every single year. It's really critical, because you go back to certain El Nino years, 92 comes to mind, and you think about hardly any storms, but Andrew did its thing, right? You can have one storm on Earth. If it hits you, it's a busy season. That's my advice. So it goes back to preparedness, James. We got to be ready every single year as if we're going to be hit, independent of that seasonal forecast.
Yeah, we're kind of fighting that here in Dixie Alley with all of these doomsday spring tornado season outlooks. Some professionals have issued them, some, non-professionals, and it's got some people scared to death. The implication is that we're going to have another April 27th, 2011 tornado outbreak here. And it's just scaring people. That doesn't do any good. And like you say, let's say somebody comes out with an outlook, well, we're not going to have much severe weather this year. Well, what are people going to do? Let their guard down. All it takes is one. And that's what you say is the exact same thing that I say. And so I really struggle with these outlooks. I mean, what good do they do? I just, and I learned something today. I thought the Hurricane Center prepared one. So it's actually CPC and not you then, huh?
That's right. We don't do that. We're a customer of that as well.
Okay. I am really struggling with these things. And I look back, and I'm not here to fuss at anybody. And I posted this on social media, and I just got brutally attacked. But a lot of outlets and NOAA predicted temperatures way above average in Texas in February. And we all know what happened. And again, are we really that good at this anyway? It's interesting. I will agree there is some skill level, and it's interesting. But what is the end user? And this is more of a Kim question, and she had to go. But my advice is just be ready every season. Yeah. All it takes is one.
it seems like these seasonal outlooks, for whatever their purpose, really are for. They're not really designed for Joe Sixpack at home. They're really the kinds of things like the hurricane outlook is. I've heard some rationalization for this as being like a for like insurance companies and reinsurance companies at sort of a macro scale. How active is the season going to be? How much is it going to cost us to to help people rebuild and cover insured losses? But at sort of a micro level, at you and me and my neighbors and my mom and my dad and my kids, the utility is not really there. And I think a previous Hurricane Center director, when I asked him about this, Bill Reed, he said, "Look, we did. It's a doorbell. It's just something to say, hey, hurricane season is coming. Don't worry about the contents of this thing. Just use it as a reminder that hurricane season is coming, and you need to be ready because it only takes one."
Yeah, and that's the best way to look at it. Look, it's a great excuse to raise the topic. So these outlooks come out. It's like, there you go, great. We send some social media posts out. Let's get people ready and try to explain it that way. I think that's what you got to do. I mean, the worst thing you could do is get, if you start alarming people over and over, and let's face it, if whether it's a tornado, if you're 20 miles away from it, you're going to say, well, it's perception, right? And Kim would love this. I think Kim would really love this. I think people's perception of their risk is so often based on their previous experience, and there's a time frame there. Maybe not even 20 years ago. Who knows? But you're comparing storms. You're comparing the last event. Everybody's experience is right where they're standing. So I think that's why to really look at it as, like you said, a doorbell. Let's talk about this topic. Here's what's going to happen. It's time to be prepared. You just got to be prepared. That's the biggest thing. And just having that plan, I think, is everything. And one thing that I think is important, we throw this word family plan, have a plan. During a storm or during a watch is not the time to plan. It's time to plan in the off season, know where you're going to go, having those supplies, because the risk is there. The risk is non-zero. It's a matter of being resilient, being prepared, and being able to take action. And, the bottom line is we don't need to have this panic, because what happens is, I think when there's panic, you don't always get the appropriate response in either direction, if you know what I mean.
So Ken, when we heard you were going to be the director of the National Hurricane Center, we were all overjoyed. We thought you were a natural for this job, sort of like a young Mickey Mantle, back in his day. So talk about the shoes you stepped into. The great directors, Bill Reed's been mentioned, Max, Dr. Sheets, Neil Frank, Robert Simpson, Gordon Dunn, all the way back to the before there was a director, the Grady Nortons of the world. What was it like to put in for and get this job? Tell us about that process. And have you talked to any of those past directors, kind of like the past President's Club?
It was there was an interesting dinner. It was with Flash, the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes. It was a conference, and we all spoke. And it was an interesting dinner. It was Max, Rick, it was Bill, and myself sitting at the table. And it was funny to see some of the other tables kind of staring, trying to figure out, kind of seen those people before. It's just kind of interesting. But it was a great discussion to really compare how the job has evolved, over time, and the nature of the job. And I think I look back at it now. Definitely I've used the word humble a couple times. I think that still continues. I'm glad I worked, same as Bill Reed, he talks about, glad he worked in Houston before taking this job. I'm glad I worked in New Orleans for so many years before I took this job, right? Because you think about not just hurricanes, but all the other weather events, the busy nature of it, the dynamic nature of everything going on, they're so aggressive with, and I think, you all remember even back in Birmingham, just how aggressive we were interacting with you all and the emergency managers, parishes, counties. I think that was great training for this, if that makes sense. I think being that busy, having, looking back at tornadoes and hurricanes, even Deepwater Horizon, right? I mean, we were the lead office in New Orleans responding to Deepwater Horizon. All those big events become training for this job. And, I think it's one of those things that, there's no huge surprises. It's just more territory to cover. I think the world, the international part of it, I didn't appreciate when I was in MIC in New Orleans. I think that aspect of it is much larger than I thought, but it's the same thing, right? Whether an MIC or here, it's keeping people safe. It's an accurate forecast. And most of all, that decision support, it's how you communicate. I mean, it's not just that forecast. I've had governors say, "Ken, your voice cracked. This one scares you." And I'm like, "Yes, this one scares me." It's that subtlety of the job, whether an MIC or here, still continues. So I'm not sure that completely answered the question, but just the nature of this with the aircraft operations, the hurricane hunters, getting the word out. And I think owning every storm, that's an interesting thing, right? If you're sitting in a certain part of the country and a storm's going somewhere else, you don't wish it on anybody ever. But at the same time, I'm glad it's not us. Well, every one of those storms is us.
And so, Ken, briefing leadership is always interesting, and you find yourself after Hurricane Laura in a briefing with the president. Was that the first time you've ever had to brief a president, or does everything tighten up just a little bit? Waiting for the for whatever questions they might ask. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's one of those situations that you have your briefing. I think over the years, I think about some of the high level briefings in Deepwater Horizon. There's been a number of those, and I think it all comes back to what we always do. It's how we communicate when it comes to decision support. It's something the whole Weather Service is doing as a weather ready nation. How do you take all that science and try to brief it out in something that's actionable? Really try to cover the forecast, start looking at different aspects of those impacts over and over. This is what it's going to do. I look back over the years, and it's all similar. I mean, just you look at the decision makers, whether it's a parish president, whether it's the president, a governor, members of Congress, whoever that is. I think the similarity in all of those is you got to cover the impacts. You can't have in your briefing starting off with I mean, I'm kind of making this up, right? A hypsometric equation. I mean, you can't go up there and start briefing things that aren't going to resonate. Resonating what it's going to do to people is the commonality in every one of those briefings, and it's so important as part of our IDSS effort, that decision support effort nationwide.
I know when President Trump asked you about the two planes in the eye, how that worked, that made me tighten up a little bit, because you don't ever want to hear recon get into the spotlight, because it's so important. We'd hate to see it become a cost-cutting factor. So I got a little nervous when I heard him ask you that question that day, for sure. So talk about recon, how important it is, and how you answered that question that day.
Did you notice I even had a slide specifically detailing the importance of recon? And we do this. We do these analyses that you can actually rerun models and take certain aspects of the data out, the reanalysis and rerunning those models. And if you take the aircraft data out, it has a negative impact on the model. So it's so incredibly important, not just the data, getting into the eye, but the synoptic data from the Gulfstream jet, but it's structure. It's structure, and it's the data is not the most attention is when it's got a big eye. The recon goes in there. Look at the stadium effect. This is amazing. But I can tell you, in the hot seat, what really matters is the structure going into it, the size of the storm, and also you go back to. I look at Dorian, I look at Sally, I look at these storms with multiple centers, and you're sitting in the hot seat trying to come up with a forecast, and there's a massive difference in what could have happened in Dorian based on which eye ended up being the dominant eye in the end. Everything from dissipation on the left side of the forecast over Hispaniola, the mountains, and on the far right side, the monster that hurricane became. So the recon data is just so incredible when it comes to the structure itself, and that's why having the Doppler radar, the P3s, having the Doppler radar on board, being able to see some of that structure, being able to detect an eye wall replacement ahead of time and realize, things could jump around a little bit during that process. It's just, I can't describe how beneficial that information is. And every one of those briefings, by the way, I do sneak a slide in there thanking them. I always, if you notice that briefing that I did that you're referring to, I talked about, while we're trying to get people away from the storm, these are the men and women, the incredible men and women that are going towards the storm, real heroes getting the information that we need. So I will sneak that slide into any presentation that I can give during those briefings.
Talk about 2019 with Dorian. The Sharpie Gate situation sort of ground everything to a halt from an interview process. How did you deal with that as the director, trying to keep your team on track, Ken?
I remember that evening, we didn't have many left, so we just, trying to regroup. And then the very next morning at 7 a.m., we just got back to it. I mean, I think for us, it was like, we have a job to do. Let's keep it about science. Let's go. And the next day, got right back to it and had a full day of interviews. So I think that was the big thing for us. I mean, we were so focused on the storm, really, really hard to know anything else that was going on. But that was the double down. That was the double down morning. We just got right back to it that morning and continued to get the information out. It's too important to stray from that in that situation.
Some folks along the Alabama Northwest Florida coast felt like Hurricane Sally snuck up on them this year, Ken. Have you heard that? What's kind of your response to that thinking along the way? Have you talked about that at all?
Yeah, it's something that goes back to one of the previous things that I'm calling up the track now. You go back to the different storms. Look at the difference in the consistency with Laura versus Sally, and it goes back to every storm is different. So when I go back to Sally, it was a frustrating storm. It's moving so slow to the point where there's multiple centers, and then you have a cone stretching from Louisiana all the way back towards Alabama and the Florida coastline as well. So you got such a large cone like that. It goes back to some of the previous conversations of the best way to show some of those impacts. But there was a large focus early on Louisiana, but the slow nature of it, the slower it was, the more it was going to be picked up and shoved further east, and that's what happened. And I think it goes back to they're all different, and that's one of them that was frustrating as well. And back to rapid intensification. It's interesting to look at that system, how you'd see some intensification and then the winds come down, and then intensification overnight before making landfall. There's so much more that we need from a research perspective when it comes to this intensity. You think about the stat that I just mentioned a while back about there's only been 4 of those Cat 5s hit the CONUS continental United States, all tropical cyclones 3 days prior. We have more to learn about that rapid intensification. So yeah, I think one of the takeaways is the fact that you get these slow storms that are wobbling around. It's a crazy track. I think they're still doing the report on Sally, but it wobbled around and wiggled around. Every time you get a little wiggle, it could change where it's going to end up by 15, 20, 30 miles. And that just a very difficult forecast. They're not all the same.
So Ken, evaluate some of the product changes you've had in the last couple of years, and then give us a sneak preview of anything that's coming out for this year that you can talk about at this point.
I think one of the biggest breakthroughs was separating storm surge out of the Sanford-Simpson scale. So having that storm surge watch and warning, I think it's just huge. That's one of the big aspects of what we do differently. So our storm surge unit, 2 people, Jamie and Cody, they work it the best that they can, getting that information out, coordinating and with the emergency managers. So that's one of the big ones that we have, really related to storm surge and the inundation mapping. I think it's not just the watches and warnings; it's having inundation mapping and really having an idea where that storm surge is going to be when it comes to evacuation and sheltering, or areas that don't need to evacuate. But it's probabilistic. Think about this for a second. We're putting out a product that's incredibly probabilistic in a way that I think is actionable. At least social science says so. That product had a huge amount of social science that went into it before we put that out. So I think that's a testimony to the social science input into what we do. We get the wind radii on the cone map. That's just trying to show the impacts outside the cone. I think there's more work, and we'll get that from some of the social science that we get back, and I think that part's exciting. So where are we going? I think a couple things. One thing, if you go back to Laura, some of the inundation mapping showed water pretty close to I-10, and some of that area is flooded to begin with. So we're trying to get some of the mapping where if it's always water, maybe we don't show that area as flooded. So we're trying to get more precise with some of our inundation mapping, and we've talked about this. We're definitely trying to get to 6 to 7 days. And by the way, we're trying to increase the amount of time for storm surge too. Now, if you think about evacuations, most big cities are going to need 3, 4, 5 days. So we need to find ways to get storm surge forecasts out that far as well. So I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do. So the wind radii, the structure of the storm, all that has to, it's not just the track, not just the intensity, but we need structure. We need size of the storm. The wind radii has to go out that far too in order to use that for the storm surge forecast. And the rest of it's going to be, let's get that social science data in here. Let's get back on this program, share some of the key findings, and then start proposing some of the changes that we can get, including what we do with the cone and other products to be able to best communicate those impacts.
So Kim, when you were doing your briefings this year, you had a mask on. How much of that was messaging? How much of it was protocol in the office? And, would you do any of that any differently, given some pushback that you got about wearing the mask during those briefings? What do you think?
There was a lot of opinion on that, wasn't there?
Oh Lord, that's another prime example of that. That's not what we're trying to talk about here, folks.
Yeah, I think I actually started responding to some of the emails that I got, and some of them were, rough. It was interesting what the emails that I got from people, but the reality is, I couldn't lose this center. I don't know how to put it. If we have backup, we have Coop, but can you imagine in a season like we had, a record season in 2020, can you imagine losing the National Hurricane Center? I can't. So back, March, April, before the season, I made that policy and this was supported all the way up the chain, that we were going to wear masks. And I think what people don't realize is this isn't a big building. It's not like we're this multi-story giant building. We're on top of each other here. So we limited the number of people in the building, but the reality, I had people handing me things. I would walk over and we were sharing data, looking at stuff together fairly closely. We kept it as brief as possible, with the social distancing, with where we sit. But the reality is there's people all over here, and we had to keep safe. And I think I look back at it, I wouldn't change what I did. It was the right thing to do. And in the end, we didn't lose the center. So whatever we did, I think we did the right thing.
I think it's important that, at the end of the day, sometimes it's not just optics or messaging. Sometimes the reason you do something is the reason you have to do it. And not losing the Hurricane Center is a really important reason to take all the precautions that you need. I unfortunately have to bail here at the bottom of the hour, but I just wanted to comment and say that I appreciate that Ken you continue the tradition of, you're a director of a national center. I'm trying to find a very delicate way to put this. A director of a national center, and historically, the Hurricane Center directors have all spoken. Y'all has a history collectively of cutting through the sort of bureaucratic way that sometimes people in positions like that talk, and you talk like humans and have a great conversation and have opinions and go on the record about things. I think of Bill Reed was really great at this. Frank was good at this, just sort of telling you, sort of what you think. And I value that significantly, especially when it's such an important topic and there's so many different avenues to talk about it and to dissect it. So I really appreciate the conversation. Appreciate you being on.
Yeah, definitely great to be on. Thanks for having me. We got to do it more often. There's so much to talk about. And I think part of that reality and how people speak in this job is it's hard knocks. You go through enough storms, you really can dissect through everything and get to the real issues really quick.
You got a standing invitation.
And Ken, before you go, real quick, I know a lot of young people. I mean, you are living the dream. I mean, you are living a dream. There's a lot of young people that would give their right arm to work one day in their career at the National Hurricane Center. What's your advice for maybe a student that's about to graduate in meteorology and they want to work for you?
Just please dream. We need you. I mean, James, I talked about, how many challenges did I talk about? I talked about the social science, rapid intensification, and a lot of these are happening right on the coastline. You talk about sweating out an event. You got a deepening rapid intensification 40 miles off the coastline. That'll keep you up. There's some science challenges. There's some social science challenges, technology challenges. My advice is to dream, do it, work here. We need you. There's plenty of room for improvement. We're trying to get better, and we need the brightest folks in meteorology to work in this place, and just do it, dream and do it.
Awesome. Well, Ken, thanks for your leadership and your friendship and all you've done for being on the show today. And we'll get you back on sooner than later because this was an amazing conversation. Thanks a lot for the time you've given us this morning.
Yeah, you bet. Anytime. You all take care.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Ken. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to roll Tony Rice and his report. We've got Jen in This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with the picks of the week, weather roundup, and much more. That might be the show title, by the way, as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
NASA JPL did it again. They landed a 1-ton robot the size of a small car on Mars. Not only that, they taught the rover to pick its own landing spot based on maps that have been created from other Mars missions. All this had to be done autonomously and at exactly the right time, which brings me to what might be the coolest job at NASA, pyromechanical engineer. In all, there's 76 pyrotechnic charges aboard the rover. They create tiny explosions at just the right time and in the right direction. These pyrotechnical devices, or pyros, move, cut, pull, and separate things, and they've got to do it within milliseconds of when they're supposed to. It started 17 minutes before landing. 10 of those pyros fired within 5 milliseconds of each other. This included miniature guillotines that cut cabling and another 6 pyrotechnic nuts that split into pieces, separating the rover, still inside its entry capsule, from the cruise stage. Thinking back to the space shuttle, it was bolted down to the launch pad by larger versions of these frangible nuts, each about the size of a basketball. The solid rocket motors alongside the shuttle orbiter were held down as the orbiter fired its 3 main engines for nearly 7 seconds. This caused the whole thing to lean forward a full 2 feet. Those 8 nuts were split in half 200 milliseconds after the solids ignited, and we had liftoff. Back on Mars, a total of 44 pyros were fired during entry, descent, and landing. This included releasing compressed springs to jettison solid tungsten weights, which changed the center of mass and pointed the capsule in the right direction as it entered the atmosphere. The biggest boom, about the size of a stick of dynamite, was at the bottom of a trash can-sized container. It was used to push out the 100-pound parachute quickly enough to ensure that it inflated properly in the thin Martian air. In the hours following landing, most of the remaining 32 charges were fired to release the robotic arm, Perseverance's mast, a high-gain antenna, and the protective covers on the hazard avoidance cameras in the front and back of the rover. All of these are just little fireworks, though. Excluding that parachute mortar, there's only about 50 to 60 grams total of explosive material and all the pyromechanical fasteners on board the rover. You can see the latest images, videos, and other news from the Perseverance mission at mars.nasa.gov. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, 7 tornadoes were confirmed on February 23rd, 1975 across parts of the South. One of the most significant of the day was given an F4 rating. It moved through parts of Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. The path length was estimated at almost 14.5 miles. Several homes were leveled south of Tuscaloosa, and in the southeast part of town, significant damage occurred at the intersection of I-59 and McFarland Boulevard. A new Scottish Inn motel was destroyed, and 23-year-old housekeeper Thelma Hill was killed when most of the second floor of the motel was sheared away by the tornado, causing a wall to fall on her. There was heavy damage to a nearby restaurant and several other commercial buildings. In the Holt area, about 30 homes were destroyed. Falling trees damaged several other houses. Close to 50 people were injured during this tornado event. You can read our summary about this tornado and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com.
And
Do you
Jen,
want
it
to learn
seems
to
like
analyze and forecast? Join Tim Vasquez at Forecast Lab, airing most weekdays on YouTube, covering current weather, forecast techniques, and random topics. The address, youtube.com/forecastlab.
only been doing this 15 years, so I need to take my cues from the control center there. Thank you, James. Jen, it seems like we just talked about this tornado a couple of weeks ago, the Scottish End tornado.
Mm-hmm.
James, of course, has a lot of memories with that tornado.
Yeah, I was like two blocks away from the thing. I was on the air at the big 12:30 WTBC working a Sunday afternoon shift. And back in those days, the tornado warnings would come across the Associated Press teletype machine, typically after they expired, which was useless. But we had a radio that went back to the Civil Defense Office in downtown Tuscaloosa, which of all places was in the attic of the city hall. I mean, you talk about the worst conceivable place. But anyway, we got the tornado warning via that Civil Defense radio, and I read it on the air and played Lightning Strikes by Lou Christie. I'll never forget this. It's just like it was yesterday. And then the power went out during that song, and we were off the air. And so I stepped outside, and I mean, I heard it. I mean, I didn't see it. It was all rain wrap, but I mean, you couldn't miss hearing that thing. And it was just a couple of blocks away, but that was a Sunday afternoon. I'll never forget it. And in all my life, and I'm old as dirt, to this day, that's the closest encounter I've had with a tornado. It was the 23rd day of February, 1975. So yeah, Bill, that when I saw that from Jen, I'm thinking, I know that tornado very well.
So James, did any of the stoners that were listening to you that day tell you that they got the warning and took cover because of it?
Stoners, man, come on, man, we were the top 40 boss AM radio station. My demographic, they're probably 16 to 24-year-old people, and
you're back on WTBC doing weather now. That's interesting.
Yeah, still, some things never change, you know. So there you go.
And Jen, you wanted, I'm sorry, and Bruce, I wanted to ask you. We were less than 2 years from getting NOAA weather radio. Boy, what a difference it would have been if we'd had NOAA weather radio. At that point in January or February of 1975.
Yeah, it's amazing. James, I worked at a radio station where we had an AP wire, a UPI wire, a Missouri internet wire, Missouri net wire, the weather wire, and a sports wire.
Wow.
And, they would announce
a lot of clacking going on there.
Yeah, a lot of clacking and a lot of constantly changing paper. But they would
ribbons.
And ribbons, yeah. They would announce like a big bulletin. It would like ding 8 times. Was it 8 times? It would ding, 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 ding.
Bulletin was 8. A flash was 10.
Yeah.
A flash rarely ever happens, but a bulletin was 8. Eight rings.
8 dings, and you hear these things start going off the weather wire and then the Missouri State wire and UPI and AP and just ding, 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 ding. You go in there and rip that thing off and come on the air and read it. And yeah, it was a tremendous leap forward when we finally got a NOAA weather radio button put into the control board. And you could just push that. And broadcast that NOAA weather radio. That was a big change. NOAA weather radio really sped up the warning process considerably, especially for radio and TV broadcasters. It really sped it up dramatically. So Ken was on talking about the importance of paying attention to the forecast, and if the seasonal forecast says a lot of hurricanes or not a lot of hurricanes, your activity should still be the same. You should always make sure you're prepared for the coming hurricane season. We've got another one, 100 days from now. So would like to remind folks to have a NOAA weather radio. It's the official voice of the National Weather Service. It's 24/7, 365 monitoring of their broadcast. If at any time of the day or night, they need to alert you to whatever it might be, a weather or non-weather emergency, that device will go off and alert you. So it's like having an indoor smoke detector for storms, an indoor tornado siren, indoor hurricane siren, or a storm surge siren now, because we're getting the storm surge watches and warnings coming off of NOAA weather radio. So I would like to encourage all of you to take advantage of our special offer for WeatherBrains listeners and viewers. If you use the promo code SPAN25, that's SPANN 25, SPAN25, When you go to midlandusa.com, you get 25% off a purchase of a weather radio. And I'll remind you, these make great gifts. You know, we have Easter coming up. We have Mother's Day. We have Father's Day. A weather radio is a wonderful gift to give someone. And if you're a meteorologist or kind of a weather follower or weather geek, if you will, these make wonderful presents, and you need one yourself. So please take advantage of this. It's something that James and WeatherBrains are doing to kind of help you and encourage you to take advantage of this system. These emergency crank radios are great for hurricane zones because you can take them if you're in an evacuation. You do not program your county into that red crank radio. It's AM, FM, weather radio, flashlight, and you can crank and generate power to recharge your smartphone. So that's what that one's for. It's a survival radio. And then that white one is the one that you have in your house, and it just alerts you automatically if something happens in your neck of the woods. So 25% off when you use the promo code SPAN, SPANN 25. That's SPAN25 is the promo code to get 25% off at midlandusa.com. The entire network is run. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, Bruce, I've heard of some realtors here this year that after the Fultondale tornado, they're going to start giving out a weather radio to those new homeowners. And that's a great idea.
Awesome.
I think so too. Traditionally they give you like a bottle of wine or something. And I think that you should give someone a NOAA weather radio. I'll tell you, I also think that the satellite TV companies, when you sign up for dish, some kind of a dish thing, they should give you a weather radio too, because there is an issue with in a heavy rain, you get rain fade on that satellite dish. You may not receive that TV broadcast signal, but having a NOAA weather radio in your home is just one more way to receive these life-saving warnings.
Well, I'm glad you covered all the important ways that weather radios serve during hurricane situations, since that's what we're talking about today, Bruce, because that's really, really critical. And we appreciate Midland and your support of the show and making what we do possible. So thank you, Bruce, for that. And James, do you remember those Jim Skinner Ford commercials back in the 70s, where the guy's standing there in the barrel, he's giving the cars away so low he had to sell his shirt, basically.
Yeah.
So Bruce is basically giving these things away for nothing, it seems like now. So maybe you should appear on the show in a barrel next week, Bruce. That might drive home.
All right. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So let's kind of quickly do a weather roundup. Goodness, I mean, our friend Troy. When we should mention Troy, he's struggling down in Austin, Texas. He has had a rough ride with frozen pipes and damage, and it's just a big mess down there. Goodness, I feel so sorry. Houston, Austin, so many places have been hit so hard with power issues and water issues. I think water is the biggest issue right now because there's so many pipes that have burst that some places have no water. They have, or very low water pressure, and it is a big mess. So while they were, I think, in the 70s yesterday, the lingering effect of those big winter storms goes on. So Jen, what's happening up in Ohio?
It is much better this week. Just the overall forecast across the country is so much more manageable. I will tell you, that was probably the busiest week I've ever had with the storm report. Probably 98% of the cities I cover, I do over 60 cities around the country, had some kind of advisory. And it's hard because it's emotional because you see what's happening and you're trying to share and you have 15, 20 seconds. How do you get the messaging out? And I've a couple of clients in Texas, one in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So I was in communication with them as much as possible. The rolling blackouts were hard because you're trying to get the forecast to them so they can play them. And then down in Kerrville, Texas, they had one of their radio towers completely froze over and collapsed. So that was horrifying as well. But things are much more quiet. I think we're going to stay with highs above freezing all week. So I'll be running around in my shorts and flip-flops all week because I'm excited about that. But it's been pretty cold, but it's looking much better up here.
Yeah, see, Bruce is, for those that are listening, Bruce Jones is in a tank top and flip-flops in Kansas City, so he's excited that it's warmer.
36 degrees.
Finally get to wear that stuff. Yeah. We're nice up here.
And again, down here in the deep south, the flow of Arctic air has been shut down for now, so everybody's going to be a lot milder this week. But let's do picks of the week. We'll go around the horn. Everybody shares something that is weather related. My pick of the week, not that long ago, we had an historic hurricane drought. A lot of people have forgotten about this. They focused on the incredible years we've had recently, but we had basically a 12-year major hurricane drought after we had that 05 season. And it's very interesting to me. You go from drought to extreme, and you wonder if another drought's coming up. But anyway, just to look back at weather history not that long ago, and all of these links will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Jen, I know you have a pick of the week for us. Go.
I do. It's a huge tornado anniversary. It was deemed the night of the tornadoes. It's the most deadly tornado outbreak in Florida history. It occurred during the nighttime hours of the 22nd of February through the 23rd. It was 7 tornadoes, 3 of which were rated F3. It was absolutely devastating. Most of the tornadoes were through central Florida, and 42 people were killed. 260 were injured. There were 3,000 structures that were damaged. And I have the link to the tornado talk summary. We go through each tornado with the radar and the mapping of what happened that night. It was just it was the worst that Florida's ever seen.
Yeah, just incredibly. I remember it very well. All right, Bruce, what do you have for us, sir, as a pick of the week?
Well, follow up on what Jen said. One of the things that happened in Florida during that tornado outbreak was we have all the snowbirds that go down there and are living in, a lot of them in trailers and so forth, and maybe not prepared for that Florida weather. So yeah, that was another little curveball on that, was the number of people living in trailers and so forth, mobile homes, RVs, campers, that were affected by that tornado outbreak. I guess my pick of the week would be, while we had the severe cold here in the United States, had record high temperatures in portions of Mongolia, northern China, and Japan. This same week that we had our record cold, they had record warmth.
There you go. When it's cold somewhere, it's hot somewhere. We've learned that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Bill Murray, what you got for us? Go.
Well, James, many thanks to Dennis Feltgen at the National Hurricane Center for setting us up with Ken, and he was so generous of his time today, and I really had been looking forward to that. Next week, we'll be talking to former NOAA Director, Dr. Neil Jacobs. That's going to be an interesting conversation. One note, Bruce, you said 100 days to hurricane season, but the last 6 years, we've had a May storm. I didn't bring that up with Ken. It may only be 70 days to hurricane season. And I didn't dare ask him, James, about 2021 after the talk about seasonal forecast.
No.
Not touching that. And my pick of the week, I have to drive to Washington, D.C. later today. So I'm going to be taking an app called Drive Weather with me that allows you to get your forecast along the route. It has a lot of cool features. You can find it in the App Store and the Google Play Store. And that'll be my pick of the week.
You can fly up there, Bill. You get free peanuts and get there faster. I'm just saying. But you're driving.
I'm still not getting on a plane yet. I'm still waiting on a vaccine. So I'm going to do this trip driving. So it's 12 hours both ways. A lot of fun.
Wow. Okay. No, I like driving. I like long road trips. That'll be fun. Well, listen, we got to wrap this thing up. WeatherBrains is typically on the air Monday night at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. We are on this morning to accommodate Ken, but we do thank Ken for being on the show this week. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. I know we've not done an email segment in like 2 years. We promise the next time Aubrey is on here, we're going to give her some time and we're going to read a bunch of emails. But the picks of the week, all of the links on the show, it's on the website, weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless.
Yeah, thanks for making the show happen in the morning, everybody.
It was great. Wonderful.
Thank you.